Good evening, everybody. Let's begin this evening's review with our motivation. We have been, one of the most daunting truths about the Dharma is that the Buddha teaches that sentient beings have been circling through samsara since beginningless time, which is a concept we can't even wrap our minds around. And that up until now, we have not ever perceived reality correctly. Our perceptions have been mistaken. Our perceptions have been erroneous. Not once in the state of our existence as beginningless time have we been able to really see the true nature of reality. And as a result, because of the ignorance, the self-grasping, the self-centered thought, the afflictions that arise due to this confusion and these misconceptions, the karma that we create, we just keep cycling over and over again. These continuities of minds being born in these physical forms, almost trapped as it appears, in bodies that, at least the human body, maybe the animal and some other sentient beings' bodies, where the way in which they are formed or created due to our karma is that we have sense organs and sense consciousnesses that keep us totally compelled to be looking outside of ourselves for our happiness, ways to avoid suffering. And while we're doing that, the bodies are getting born and reborn over and over again, aging, getting sick and dying. So samsara is basically having these minds under the controls of afflictions and karma. And here we are. That's on one way of looking at our situation. A daunting concept. And at the same time, because of or due to cycling in samsara somewhere along those previous lives, each of us has created some amazing virtue. We don't know how many causes and conditions, but we had to have done something right. The practice of ethical conduct, the 6 far-reaching practices, making deep aspirations to have the causes and conditions to meet the Dharma again. And so here we are with this precious human life, with all the causes and conditions, the freedoms and fortunes, to have met the Dharma. And after we met the Dharma, we didn't just say, well, that was kind of odd, or that was kind of interesting, and go on to something else. Something about the Dharma really connected to our heart, and consciously or unconsciously, we felt really drawn to it. And so we're drawn to it, and what makes it even rare is that after the sort of the honeymoon period of meeting the Dharma, where you're on top of the world and the work really begins, we're still here. We're still practicing, we're still trying to transform our minds, understanding what to abandon and what to cultivate. And we have also had the extraordinary virtuous karma of meeting qualified Mahayana spiritual mentors who have heard the teachings, who have meditated on them, contemplated them, and for many of them have actualized them in their minds. And so here we are having this rare, incredible opportunity to listen to the 400 stanzas of Aryadeva, a remarkable, realized being, I'm sure, taught by a qualified spiritual mentor who has heard these teachings from her teachers, has thought about them, has contemplated them, has seen how they apply to her life. And through her wonderful bodhicitta and great compassion, she has been willing to share this with us. And so tonight, let's really count and have deep gratitude for the fortune that we have created, and to be able to keep our hearts and minds open to the Dharma, knowing that awakening requires limitless causes and conditions, and that what we are doing here right now tonight is so much a part of making that happen. It may be a long, 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 long way away, but this virtuous activity done with the motivation of bodhicitta, that we really want to have the skills, the wisdom, the compassion to be able to guide and share this wisdom with all sentient beings so they too can free themselves from this limitless cycle of birth, aging, and death under the control of afflictions and karma. And so may we listen, may we learn with humility, curiosity, so that we may be able to become awakened, to have these causes and conditions ripen in that future result for the benefit of all living beings, so that we may guide them as well along the path to awakening. Let's really see our incredible good fortune and listen to the teachings tonight. And they are indeed amazing teachings. So Venerable is still away in Australia. She'll be gone for almost another 10 or 11 days, so you're going to get some more reviews from the Sangha here. And so we are reviewing chapter 8, and this chapter is so filled with so much profound teachings on, what makes samsara go around, and how it can be eliminated. We're beginning to start to work our way into, as it says here, that this is the last chapter. We are talking about the method side of the path and easing into the nitty-gritty stuff of the wisdom side of the path, which begin at chapter 9, which Venerable's already started. So Venerable Chinny and I have taken this chapter, the 25 verses, and we have split them so that I'll do 13 this week and Venerable Chinny will do 12 next week. And I have to say that there were about 6.5 hours of audio on this 13 verses, and I had to somehow distill that down to an hour. And so I took some of Venerable's, it seemed to be a little bit of pointers in that a few of the verses she spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes on, and a number of the verses she spent 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes. And so I'm going to likewise, the ones that were quite short, I'm actually going to skip because there's so much in the other ones. And there aren't that many that I'm going to skip, but I had to make some decisions and I had to edit some things just to try to get this into a reasonable time. Okay, so we're at verse 176. So what came before in the previous chapters is we talked about the 4 distortions, that the things are impermanent, although we see them as permanent. Things are in the nature of dukkha, although we see them in the nature of happiness. Things are in the nature of impurity or foulness, but we see them as pure or beautiful. And that the things lack a self, but we see them as having a very concrete, solid, independent self. So those are the first 4 chapters. Then they continue. We talked about the bodhisattva deeds, which was a remarkable chapter, how we have to eliminate the afflictions that get in the way to be able to perform those deeds. We talked about having to eliminate attachment that impedes us, crucial. We talked about how we have to see through the allure of sense objects. And now we're getting to the point on showing the methods on how to actually do some of these things. So the first verse, 176, the subheading is why afflictions can be abandoned. And we have our friend Joe, who actually has a $6 million question here for verse 176. How do we escape from the bondage of desire which we have been accustomed to since beginningless time? That really is a big question and a wise question. And the verse that follows his question is, just as friendship between people who disagree does not last long, desire does not last long when all things' faults are recognized. So friendships motivated by desire between 2 people don't last because eventually things get a little worn, things get a little bit disagreeable, things get a little bit difficult, and so the relationship doesn't last. Similarly, those wise ones realize that Desire does not last long in their minds because they come to recognize the faults of all the external and internal things which give rise to many unwanted consequences. So we've got the wise folks who realize that there isn't anything lasting in samsara, although in the beginning it looks very attractive and there seems to be a lot of promise involved in samsara. They soon realize that that's just temporary at best. And so Venerable, she has some wonderful commentaries, and she uses analogies a lot, which I find very, very helpful. Some of them are pretty whimsical and some are very serious. So the analogy that she uses for this verse, because she says someone who's done some serious meditation on the first 7 chapters is not going to see sense objects as their best friends, because they know better. She says they're going to be like this little mouse, which she says is like this adept or this yogi or what they call the wise person in these verses, who says, I remember most of the time that I didn't get any rice, but I got exhausted by pecking at this lever. In fact, rice doesn't come most of the time. I think I should just stop what I'm doing and think about doing something else that might give me something that's lasting, something that's really beneficial. Now that's a smart mouse, and that's how the adepts see samsara, as they realize that after all of that trying to get happiness over and over again, life after life, most of the time it's not even there, the rest of the time it's fleeting, and so they really turn their minds to understanding the nature of samsara and really turn their minds to freeing themselves. And what they do discover is that they investigate, they find that attachment's root is found to be unstable and undependable. Therefore, attachment can be eliminated. The basis for attachment is unstable because the objects don't always bring us pleasure. That's what the analogy about the mouse and the pecking in the rice. And it's not only the pecking that is getting us the happiness. Is what Venerable says here is that there are so many causes and conditions that have to come together just to get the fleeting samsaric happinesses that we end up becoming exhausted because it takes so much effort to get what little happiness, what little samsaric pleasure there is, because it's so fleeting, it's so temporary, and in fact it's in the nature of dukkha, it's in the nature of unsatisfactory conditions. That we're sentencing ourselves to exhaustion by trying to think that we can get happiness in samsara. That's why they say that nirvana, which is an uncompounded and unconditioned state that doesn't depend on causes and conditions, is peace. You don't have to keep creating one cause after another when you attain nirvana. Once you have attained true cessation, that's it. You don't have to continue to create cause and conditions, you're there. So the adept has figured this out. Now what happens, what do? When we see the faults of samsara, we think that one of the ways of fixing it is to get what we want. So here's our second analogy. I really like this analogy. We don't think that fixing the faults of samsara is to get out of samsara altogether. So she has an analogy that samsara is like a merry-go-round. And we've been riding on the horsey for a while. We're getting kind of dizzy, our stomach's getting kind of upset. And we think that it's the horsey's fault. And so you think, if I go ride on that little giraffe over there, my stomach ache is going to go away. But we never think, maybe I should get off of this merry-go-round altogether. We may not know that there's a possibility of getting off. Maybe we know that there is a possibility, but that giraffe looks awful cute. So I'm going to go ride the giraffe for a while, and then after that I'll get off the merry-go-round. So that's what Venerable says, that's our tweaking samsara, to make it a little better. And then we think that's the antidote to our misery. And this going from horsey to giraffe to pig to camel to, up and down, round and round. She says this continual looking for samsara by just changing the object is what leads us to all kinds of addictions. So that's where she takes the analogy and puts it into our real life. That's when we're seeking the samsaric remedy to a problem that can't be solved by a samsaric remedy. We can't keep changing horsey, giraffe. We've got to get off the merry-go-round. So we either don't believe that we can get off the merry-go-round, or we try to look for something and for the time being until we can figure it out. We don't see an alternative to getting liberated, so we just give up, although we still have enough energy to ride the merry-go-round, or we sit and suck our thumbs. And Venerable says, how do grown-ups suck their thumbs? They drink, they go shopping, they do illegal drugs or abuse prescriptions, they overeat, they surf the internet for hours and hours. So that's our horsey, our giraffe, our camel, our piggy this life, is when we get discouraged. We don't know how to get out of samsara, so we're going to distract ourselves by doing all these worldly things. This is what we do when we don't believe afflictions can be abandoned. But they can be because their focal base is not certain or dependable. So the objects that our attachment hooks into, they don't have any happiness from their side, they're unstable, they arise, they cease, they arise, they cease, they are in the nature of dukkha. The object the afflictions are focused on and the way we are apprehending them is not something stable. So we're starting to move. This first verse is about how there's a possibility of the afflictions being abandoned. The next verse, afflictions can be abandoned because the object is not certain. The object is unstable. The object is not definite. And here's the verse. Some are attracted to it, some are averse to it, some feel confused by it. Thus desire has no object. Desire arises for an object, but what we see is a desirable object. We think the desire, the attraction is coming from the object itself. When someone else sees that object as gross and disgusting, they believe that the unpleasant, the disgusting qualities are coming from the object. And then there's a third person who sees it and just doesn't know what to think. So once again, she goes into using an analogy, which this one also makes a lot of sense. Okay, spicy food. It's just food. Some people like spicy food, some people hate spicy food, and some people aren't quite sure. Their inappropriate attention says, okay, so for the folks who love spicy food, the hotter the better. Oh, it is so delicious, it makes me so happy, attachment arises. We eat a lot of it, we just rant and rave, it's just delicious. Oh, I have not tasted anything so delicious. We think that that deliciousness is coming from the food. Okay, their inappropriate attention is telling them, okay. Then there's another person who eats the spicy food, and it's like, this is gross, I can't even put it in my mouth, this is terrible. Their inappropriate attention is telling them a totally different story about the exact same object. And then there's a third person who comes into the restaurant, hasn't heard the discussion about spicy, not spicy, and they can't figure out what to order because they go, well, what does spicy mean? What does not spicy mean? So the third person has a totally different story because they're like, well, I don't understand, or I don't even know what I should do here. The object is the same, but based on the story, the interpretation of the inappropriate attention that's going on, 3 different responses occur for 3 different people. If the object were truly existent, without a doubt, they would all see it the same way. If it was truly inherently delicious, without a doubt, all 3 of them would experience it as such. If it was truly inherently disgusting and awful, all 3 of them would experience it like that as well. But that doesn't happen. That shows, and this is where we have to really understand that this is like the most, it's like right in our face in life, is that the reality is that things don't exist from their own side as attractive or unattractive. The focal object of the affliction is only imputed by conceptuality. And what you're desiring or having aversion or confusion about doesn't exist truly in the way that you think. So it's like, here's this practical daily experience that shows us that the object that our attachment is focused on or our aversion is focused on, it doesn't exist the way that we say it does, or the way that we think our inappropriate attention is saying that it does. Which means that the object's unstable, it's not reliable, it's not the source of all the afflictions that are going on in our minds. Therefore, the affliction can be abandoned because the object of the attachment or the anger or the jealousy or the pride is unstable. There's nothing going on from its side to bring the affliction up. Therefore, you pull the inappropriate attention away, that affliction's going to subdue. At time it disappears altogether. It's the inappropriate attention, the story that we tell ourselves about the object. Okay, so that's The object is unstable. Okay, on verse 178, so we're getting a little bit of a progression here. Aryadeva is really starting to talk about the affliction, the object, and the causes of the object, seeing that all of this is so unstable that the affliction can be eliminated because there's nothing there to truly hold on to. So the next verse is, afflictions can be abandoned because the causes of the objects are also not certain, definite, stable. Apart from conceptuality, desire and so forth have no existence. Who with intelligence would hold there are real things imputed by conceptuality? Afflictions can be abandoned not only because their objects don't truly exist, which we saw with the spicy food, but also their causes aren't truly existent. Here the cause of the afflictions is said to be the conceptualization, and in particular the inappropriate attention. So afflictions cannot be found apart from the conceptuality of inappropriate attention and the imputation by conceptuality, which means imputing that the certain object has certain qualities. That the affliction and the existence of the object, the way we perceive them, are dependent and reliant, and that they don't exist from their own side. So our afflictions don't exist from their own side. The object that our afflictions are focusing in on don't exist from their own side. If things did exist from their own side, then somebody with intelligence would not hold that they were imputed by conceptuality, because imputed by conceptuality is the opposite, existing from his own side. So if a sage were to believe and to have the realization that things existed from their own side, they would never say that they were imputed by conceptuality. They would agree. They would say, yes, this thing exists truly from its own side. That's what I've actualized under analysis, but that's not what happens. What they see is that they're imputed by conceptuality and that they don't exist from their own side. So the sages are sort of the verifiers that if things were truly existent, the sages, the wise ones, would have that realization, but that's not what they're realizing. They're realizing that things simply exist by imputation and that they don't exist from their own side. So then we go into probably one of the most famous sort of reasonings for this particular point is the snake and the rope. And after reading this a number of times, it's just, it's a really good analogy, at least from my mind. Okay. So when a snake is imputed on a rope, the parts of the rope are not the snake. The continuum of the rope isn't the snake. So the changing moment by moment, the disintegration, the arising, the disintegration of the rope isn't the snake. You can impute a snake to a rope and really believe that it's there. You can even be frightened of it. But there's nothing there that is a snake. In its parts, in its continuum, no snake whatsoever. Similarly, so then we go from the snake to our aggregates: form, feeling, discrimination, volitional factors, and consciousness, which make up the collection of aggregates. Our little flicker wants, there she goes, she left. Okay, the collection of our aggregates. What makes up the collection of the aggregates, the individual ones, aren't the person. The continuum of the collection of aggregates is not the person. That which possesses the continuum of the aggregates, which is the conventional self, none of these things is the person. When we think I, we feel that there is really a person there. But when you go looking, there is no person in the parts. There's no person in the collection of the parts. There's no person in the continuity of the parts. And the conventional person that is merely labeled is not findable. And that's because the person exists dependently. Being imputed in dependence upon the aggregates, the person doesn't exist from their own side. So the analogy of the rope and the snake, not being able to find the snake in the parts, the continuity, the parts. The person unfindable, when you start looking at the parts and the continuity and the collection, even the individual ones. So in that respect, those two analogies are similar. And this is the case for all phenomena. And so she uses our affliction. She says, they themselves don't truly exist. Sometimes we think that our anger truly exists. So she's going to use one of our most favorite afflictions, and she's going to run it through the same thing. But all the anger is what we label upon different conceptual states of mind that have a similarity of arising on the basis of an inappropriate attention that exaggerates the unpleasant or the disagreeable qualities of that object. You want to then flee or you want to fight. Anger is simply what we label in dependence upon different moments of mind that have some related qualities. But when we think of anger, do we think that it's just something labeled on moments of mind that have similar qualities about them? We think that anger is inherently existent, solid, it's inside of us like this solid piece of material, this solid something, that it inherently exists from its own side. But it's not. It's quite interesting to look at our emotions and how we grasp the afflictions themselves as being truly existent, and how this keeps us trapped in the affliction itself. Whereas if we saw the affliction as being merely labeled in dependence upon these familiar little moments of mind that have similar sort of flavor to them, it would help us to loosen up our grasp on our affliction so we don't go nosediving when we feel like we're getting depressed, or we get all agitated when we get angry, or we get really closed in when we feel afraid because we really believe that that's who we are. If we were to see these things just as these impermanent phenomena that are sort of moment by moment having these similar kind of flavors to them, it would help us kind of loosen this grasp of them, of seeing them as inherently existent. So then, the clarifier on the snake and the rope and the aggregates and the person, because Venerable goes back to the snake and the rope, because there is a difference between labeling a rope as a snake and labeling a collection of aggregates as a person. There's a difference when we label that, because there is no snake there whatsoever. It doesn't exist because there's no way a rope can function as a snake. Therefore, the imputation indicates the non-existence of the snake. There's no way that rope can function as a snake, so we're actually imputing something that doesn't exist. But when we impute person on a collection of aggregates, that doesn't mean that the person is non-existent, just like the snake and the rope. It just means that when we search for that person using ultimate analysis to find out what person it's actually referring to, we can't find anything. Okay, so when we're looking at it with ultimate analysis, there's an unfindability of that person. Yet, in that case, the person that's being labeled doesn't indicate that it's non-existent. Because we can't find it under ultimate analysis doesn't mean that it's not findable. There's a conventional person that exists, designated on the collection of aggregates that function and do things. All right, unlike the snake and the rope, that rope can't function as a snake no matter how we try. Where the aggregates do function as a person. They do things, they feel things, they experience things. And on those aggregates, we label person. And we do this all the time. All phenomena are imputed by conceptuality, but not everything imputed by conceptuality exists. So here's the other piece. So as long as we don't do the analysis, because no analysis is made when the person designated on the collection of aggregates functions and does things, the person exists by being merely labeled. All phenomena are imputed by conceptuality, but not everything imputed by conceptuality exists. Just because we impute something and give it a name and a concept doesn't mean that it exists. We see this in our lives when we say, so-and-so was so rude to me. and insulting. So we give that label in exchange. But when we stop and look at the situation, we revisit it with the person and say, when you said that, what did you mean? And when you suddenly realize, when they explained it, that you had totally misunderstood what they had said. And because you had misunderstood that, or because we misunderstood it, we went ahead and made it imputed by conceptuality using this inappropriate attention. We decided that they were rude, they were mean-spirited, they were unkind, they were a jerk. When in fact that person doesn't exist. We're imputing a conceptuality that, referring to a person that didn't exist. We simply misunderstood them, took it personally, got all upset about something that didn't ever happen. So not everything imputed exists. We impute all sorts of things, get into a big fuss about it, about something that didn't happen. And she uses that example of the war in Iraq. You know, the weapons of mass destruction. There were a whole lot of people who really believed that they existed. And we went to war because of that. And to this day, there's no hardcore evidence on any level that they were actually there. But a whole bunch of people agreed with it. But that didn't mean that they existed. Okay, I'm trying to be aware of my time here. Okay, boy. Okay, so that one she spent a lot of time on, that verse. Apart from conceptuality, verse number 78. Then the following week, she went back again and wanted to show that how afflictions can be eliminated is very important, because we don't believe that our mental afflictions can be eliminated and subdued, then we're not going to try to really practice the path to subdue them. If we think our greed, our anger, and our insecurity are an inherent part of us, and they're always going to be there, that the nature of our mind, we're not even going to try to work on them. So she went back the following week and said, we have to realize that these afflictions are unstable, that the objects, that the cause of the objects, all of that is unstable, can be eliminated. They're impermanent, changing moment by moment. They're not a part of us. Okay, I'm going to go right past that one. Okay, she said conceptuality. Okay, we're going to get into conceptuality. We had it in that verse. We have it in a few more verses. Has different meanings. Just labeling things. That things exist in dependence upon having a name, having a label. That's one way of conceptuality. The second one ties to this mental factor of inappropriate attention and ties into seeing changeable things as static, things that are foul, as pure, the four distortions. This kind of conceptuality puts an overlay on an object. It imputes qualities and traits that it doesn't have, or it exaggerates qualities that it does have. And then as a reaction, our mind gets all crazy about something that we ourselves projected and created. So that's the second meaning of conceptuality, this inappropriate attention that ties into seeing the four distortions, puts an overlay on the object.
Projections?
Yeah. Deluded projection. This kind of conceptuality puts an overlay on an object. It imputes qualities and traits it doesn't have, or exaggerates traits it does have, and then has a reaction, gets really bent out of shape about something that we ourselves projected and created through the inappropriate attention, the conceptualization.
You said that is the other meaning of conceptuality.
Right.
And what is the other?
The first one is just labeling things by convention. Recorder, clock. That's a form of conceptuality, giving it a name and a label. And then there's this other part where we impute, through inappropriate attention, things, names and labels and modes of existence that aren't there. We create them. That's another form of
characteristics that it doesn't have.
Either we exaggerate ones that it does have, like if somebody's good looking, we think they're absolutely drop dead gorgeous, so we've imputed more attraction that's there, or we actually make up qualities that don't exist, That's part of the conceptualization. Yeah. Okay. And Venerable says this happens all the time in our lives. We're not even aware of it. Because whatever we project onto things, we immediately believe that they're true. We never doubt it. We doubt the Buddha's teachings, which is a wrong kind of doubt, but we never doubt what our mind thinks. But she said, why is she so propelled to write, don't believe everything you think? She really wanted to get it across that just because we think it, it doesn't mean that it's real, doesn't mean that it exists. That this inappropriate attention and this conceptuality really get us into all sorts of trouble. And so she went into this whole thing about, we follow the same schedule every day here. We live with the same people, we do the same things every day, but one day we'll see a person and say they're so kind and thoughtful and sweet, and the next day we can't stand them. And both of those days we think we're 100% true on the first day, and the second day we believed and said that the observation on the second day was also true. So the task is to begin to question our projections and judgments and opinions, and then in that way see that our afflictions can be eliminated, because we're painting pictures. She says we're these incredible painters. We're painting overlays on top of our lives all the time. These wild pop art, crazy paintings over just everyday conventional existence. We paint beauty on things that aren't beautiful. We paint horrible things on things that aren't fearful and horrible. We paint true existence on things that don't exist from their own side. She says not only are we painters, but we're screenwriters. Writing dramas all day long. Look at what that person did. No one loves me. I can tell by that they just walked by me. Look at Karuna, she doesn't love me. She walked by me, didn't even say hi. The stink bugs, they're the worst. They walk by all the time and don't even say hi. This is all conceptuality. All of those judgments that we have that bring this rise of either sadness or anger or attachment or jealousy, anytime we have an affliction in our mind, we are imputing a reality that doesn't exist. The whole melodrama is coming from our minds. We're making it up as we go. Okay. So we're going to skip into, that was just verse 178. Now we're going to verse 180, which is, those with little merit do not even doubt this doctrine. Entertaining just a doubt tears to tatters worldly existence. So this is that very, very famous verse. So Job Lowe is back. If afflictions are stopped by analyzing in this way, why haven't people not abandoned them? If you analyze the object and see that everyone doesn't react to it in the same way, if you've looked at conceptuality and see how you create things, if you see that people are not inherently bound together, then why are people having so many afflictions in their mind? How come they're having all these problems? Shouldn't we have eliminated them by now? First reason is because those with little merit don't even ask the question like, what's going on? What's going on in my mind? Who am I? This whole idea about merit, that by creating virtue, by purification, actually removes obstacles from our minds and instead instills a kind of clarity, a kind of curiosity. And I don't know about you, but before I met the Dharma, I never questioned anything about how my mind worked or how things were going on. What was this world like? But because, since I met the Dharma, I've been trying to do a lot of purification, trying to do a lot of virtuous activity to accumulate merit. And as the years go on, well, first of all, we've all created the causes to hear these beautiful teachings that talk about the nature of reality. But as the familiarity, as we accumulate merit and purify, that the words are starting to sound a little familiar. Maybe there's a few strands of the teachings that are starting to make sense. But those with little merit don't ever even ponder these questions about, who am I really? What is my mind? How do things exist? It doesn't mean that they'll never have those questions. If they have some experience of the Dharma, if they learn how to purify and accumulate merit, they'll start asking the same questions that all of us have started to ask, which were never in our minds 10, 15, 20 years ago. Just entertaining just a doubt tears to tatters worldly existence. If we have some doubt about things existing the way they appear, or some doubt of how I really exist and what reality is, it will push us to learn more. So at this point, Venerable's really trying to encourage us, even if we have doubt, even if we're confused, even though we don't understand a lot of this. She says the kind of positive doubt, the doubt that leads toward a correct conclusion, which says, I really want to understand this, and start asking questions. She says this is really going to help us to go to the right direction, and to have this kind of curiosity that's going to be able to eventually ask deeper questions, and over time it will bear fruit. But for most folks, because they don't have this merit, they haven't garnered a precious human life, they don't even have any questions about the two truths. I mean, how does reality really exist? They don't even know to ask that. And a lot of that is because our culture we were raised to have jobs and go to school and have families. Our family never said, well, you really have to understand the nature of reality. So you need to find teachers who are qualified who can teach you how to understand that because honey, sweetie, the way that you're looking at this situation right now, that Tommy didn't throw that sand in your face and you're angry because of him, you're angry because you have this afflicted state of mind. We just didn't, we don't have that kind of worldview. So we have to Venerable's giving us a little bit of, okay, we didn't have it. Most human beings, most beings don't have that as a worldview. But what she's saying that since we have the opportunity, we've created the merit to have the teachings, is that as time goes on and we continue to accumulate merit and purification, it's that these questions and this clarity starts to arise, and this beautiful curiosity that wants to know more. Okay. Well, she says, even if you go to a therapist, most people don't believe that liberation is possible. Our whole society says this is as good as it gets, folks. Therapists are wonderful. They can help us with our personal problems. They do great work. But they can't tell us about the two truths or dependent arising or emptiness. They can't really help us on that deeper level that's going to make the fundamental transformations in our mind that are really going to bring about the attainments that we're looking for. Okay, so just thinking, okay, where's this? This is really a great sentence. We've been in cyclic existence since beginningless time, and how many of those lives have we ever heard about the Dharma, investigating the nature of reality? And then she goes to say, while we look around just on planet Earth, considering humans, animals, insects, all the living beings, how many of them are thinking of the nature of reality? All the little gazillion ants we have, all the wasps, all the yellow jackets, the stink bugs, they have no opportunity to even ponder what their minds are about, what reality is about. So what he keeps saying is, what little we understand, this is very, very special, and this is very, very amazing. So don't get discouraged. Okay, I'm really trying to be... Okay, there's just one little piece on the next verse that I wanted to share. Verse 181, advice on the understanding the meaning of emptiness, or advice on taking interest in the fundamental mode of existence. The subduers said of this doctrine, there will be an increase until liberation. Anyone who lacks interest in it clearly has no sense. And this is where she said in the teachings, Aryadeva pulls no punches. When we're being foolish, he tells us. So what this verse is saying is that the Buddha teaches that from the first moment of the path of seeing, when we have this direct realization of emptiness, until you attain liberation or awakening, there will be no decline and only increase in your direct realization of emptiness. So once again, it's the familiarity, it's the deepening of this understanding once you reach the path of seeing. And the tragedy is that anyone who lacks interest in the meaning of emptiness has no sense, because the realization of emptiness is what is going to liberate us. And the reason that it says here that we have no sense, it's because this is the reason. If this is the method to increase our good qualities, practicing the Dharma, realizing emptiness. It leads us from this tumultuous world where we're thrown around by our afflictions. We're subjected to birth, aging, sickness, and death. If we have no interest about learning about it, it's like someone having a curable disease and not bothering to take the medicine. So emptiness is like the ultimate medicine. And by not having any interest, even though those of us who are fortunate to realize we're starting to understand the nature of samsara, we know that by understanding and actualizing the Dharma, all of our good qualities will grow, our understanding of the nature of reality will deepen. If we don't go for it, we're being these silly beings.
In that verse, what increases wisdom?
The wisdom and the good qualities once you've realized emptiness. The wise should take interest in thinking about emptiness because the worldly practices and the results come to an end once they bear fruit. And then she went ahead and used the example of generosity. If you give with a generous heart because you want to have wealth as a future in one of your future rebirths, that's a Dharma motivation. But once you have that rebirth where the wealth is part of that life, that karma ripens and it's done. But if you practice generosity, looking at the giver, the object, the agent, and the action as being empty and lacking any inherent existence, you're creating the causes and conditions to be able to have that understanding and deepen your emptiness and to have that sort of held for future fruit. Let me put it down. Okay. Whereas if we have the motivation to attain liberation or awakening, that the benefit of whatever action we do not only acts of generosity will not be consumed until we attain the goal. So that's when we start our meditations and dedicate at the end of the day, that we try to dedicate, we use the bodhicitta motivation, we try to look at emptiness, we try to look at dependent arising. We're thinking about something virtuous, setting our minds in that direction. So those actions will bear fruit much, much farther in the future. And they will be part of what's going to bring the liberation and the awakening, not just some nice rebirth that we have a lot of money, we've got nice, beautiful bodies and lovely complexions and people like us. We want to really have those virtuous actions within the sphere of emptiness, looking at those three things, the agent, object, and the action of all the things that we do as empty, that we really are starting to hone in on what they're going to really bear fruit of, what the result is going to be in the future. I know I'm going really fast, folks, but there's a lot here. Okay, here's another one. Here's Joe Blow. I'm going to 183, showing the means for turning away from samsara. So Joe says, okay, if things are empty, it's appropriate to teach emptiness. But what's the use in teaching how the world of sentient beings and the environments come into being? Why do we have to know about precious human life? Why do we have to know about refuge, the sufferings of cyclic existence? Why do we have to know all of that if you just teach emptiness? That would be sufficient. Okay, so he doesn't want to do he doesn't want to do the gradual path. He wants to go right up into the advanced practices, and he wants to be taught emptiness. So the verse says, whatever contains teachings about the world speaks of engagement. Whatever contains elucidation of the ultimate speaks of disengagement. So what Aryadeva is meaning here is that emptiness can't be understood without first having an explanation of how samsara comes into being. The 12 links, 4 noble truths are telling us how our predicament comes about. We have to understand this. This is like the first noble truth. The second noble truth. Why are we in this predicament? We're in this predicament, this is what it looks like, and this is why we're in it. And Venerable says, why do we have to learn? Because if we don't, we will be born and reborn under the influence of afflictions and karma, and we will never understand how to get out. And she gave a few more reasons. She said, first of all, it helps with renunciation. If we don't study the 4 noble truths, and we really don't understand how ignorance, anger, and attachment create karma, which creates rebirth, we're never going to realize how to be free, but we've got to know our situation first. We have to know the causes of it. And without the wish to be free of samsara, we're never going to want to learn the ways to be free. So that's the first reason why we have to learn about precious human life and karma and impermanence, death, the disadvantages of cyclic existence, all the initial middle scope. The second reason, she says, we study the Four Noble Truths and the whole evolution of samsara because it helps us to refute the wrong conceptions regarding arising and production. Refuting these wrong conceptions is a preliminary to understanding emptiness. Because as long as we have these wrong conceptions in our minds about how our predicament of being born in samsara comes about, there's no way we're ever going to understand emptiness. So there's three major gross misconceptions that we have that get in the way of us understanding emptiness. They're huge hindrances in even getting our foot in the door regarding the ability to understand the subtle nature of reality. First one of the wrong conceptions on how we think samsara comes about is caused by a creator or an external being. The second one is that it's causeless and random, kind of happens by accident. And the third one is caused by incompatible causes. So for the first one, when we study the Four Noble Truths and dependent arising, we see that rebirth includes all the unsatisfactory conditions that we experience. We see that all of it comes from karma, which arises from mental afflictions that are rooted in ignorance, that grasp at inherent existence. So we're starting to see the causality of how samsara comes into being. Understanding even a little of this, even if you're not clear about what ignorance is, that you don't understand completely what it grasps at, even this little understanding helps us to begin to see that our situation is not brought about by a creator. And so there's this whole notion about them, which many religions have, that the creator is permanent. God doesn't have a cause, doesn't change. And so this is where the reasoning and the logic that take this one apart begin. How can something that doesn't change create anything? Because creating involves changing. For something to arise, something has to change. But if you say that God doesn't change, then how does God create? That's the first question that kind of starts picking apart this first thing about samsara is created by some God. The second one is, why did God create things the way they are? It says, well, he wanted you to find him and develop wisdom. But if God were a creator, why didn't he create the wisdom within beings already? Why didn't he put himself right there with all sentient beings? Why didn't he create all of us with wisdom already, rather than having to go through all this trial? If he created us, why didn't he create us with kind hearts? Why didn't he create us with everything that we need? Why didn't he create us equally, so that everybody gets started on the same foot? Why do we have to go through all of this? Where is his wisdom? Where is his compassion? So that's another way of looking at that. This God, if he could create, he didn't create very well. Very, very flawed. So when you examine these, you realize that the ideas just don't jive with the conception that there's an external creator deity that runs the show. But what happens, and what Venerable said, is that a lot of times for some of us, we left our religion of origin because we couldn't live with this understanding. There was this whole thing about this external God that sort of was running the show, and if somebody suffered, well, that was because, God's grace, or God only knows, or whatever. I mean, there was always this reasoning about only God knows. And for many of us, we left our religions because we could no longer tolerate that. It didn't make sense. We couldn't live with these understandings. But what happens is, Venerable says, even though we've met the Dharma, because we learned a lot of that misconception about a creator God when we were little, they're hiding in the nooks and crannies of our minds, sometimes very unconsciously. And when you practice the Dharma, you can find that sometimes this idea about a permanent God will bleed through when you're thinking about the three jewels, when you're thinking about afflictions, when you're thinking about how things happen to us. So she says that it's really important that we make sure that we don't have a little bit of this bleed through on this creator God that kind of gets an overlay on a lot of our Dharma practice in relationship to the Buddha. She says, from a Dharma viewpoint, no one can send us to a lower rebirth, only our self-grasping ignorance and our self-centered thought. There's no God that can send us to hell. There's no God that can take us to heaven. No external deity, no sentient being, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, none of their negative actions can send us to a lower realm. Only our negative actions that we create determine all of this. So that was the first one, the Creator. And we're going to run out of time. I'm going to go over a little bit. Okay, so that's the first misconception, is that there is this external deity that kind of runs the show. And as you can see, there's fairly easy reasoning to kind of figure that out, to realize that that is not true, that that is a wrong misconception. The second one is that things arise causelessly. Our samsara arose randomly. Things happen without a cause. So the first logical reasons, the simple questions are, if things happen without causes, why would you eat to stop your hunger? Why would you put gas in the car to make it run? Why would you plant crops to grow food? If things happen randomly without causes, why would you do anything? And when we think about it, we do everything because we want to experience a certain result. We want to create certain causes and conditions to experience a certain result. But if things happen causelessly, we wouldn't have to do anything. They would just come about like this. The other thing that we use that goes along underneath this one is that for many people in our society, it's just luck that things happen. Gosh, she's so lucky to have that job. She's so lucky to be born in that family. She's got great parents. You know? Gosh, they're so lucky. It's like this luck is an inherently existent thing that sort of drops out of the sky, that there's no cause. It's just this random luck that shows up for certain people.
Other people.
Other people. We're not that lucky. How many times have we said that, God, you're so lucky? It's like this. We've got it right there. It says inherently existent something. Okay, then the third one is our samsara comes about due to discordant causes, something that doesn't have the power to bring about the result. Discordant, incompatible. Okay, so from ancient India even to our modern times, there's this belief with some people that there's a kind of primordial substance, there's kind of a cosmic energy field, there's some sort of cosmic substance that all beings sort of arise out of, and at the time of death they sort of return to. This is a wrong view. And another one, which was very interesting, is the way our society uses science. So on one hand, our body, our genes, our neurons all have influence on how we experience life. That's very, very clear, very justifiable. But as society, she said, we are tending towards giving biology, genetics, neurology more power in our explanation of why we experience what we do than they probably should have, in ever-increasing ways. And she says that this is a way on how we disempower ourselves. Because if we explain our difficulties through genetics or neurology or some sort of physical mutation, we totally alleviate having the responsibility for what goes on with our lives, what goes on with our minds. Why am I an alcoholic? Because it runs in the family. Why do I have a hot temper? It's genetic. All the women in our family have hot tempers. That kind of perspective of putting everything on some genetics or brain chemistry really has us abdicating our personal responsibility. And what happens, because we've got names for all of these disorders, that we end up just giving a pill, medicating ourselves. I'm depressed, I'm unhappy, I have no responsibility for the way I think, just give me some medicine. And Venerable says, not everyone thinks this way, but there's a growing tendency in our culture now to put everything on the body. Everything that's wrong with us, there's something wrong out there, there's something wrong in the physical component. She says we give up the power of our own minds to heal themselves, to figure things out. Those diagnoses become very solid, very permanent. I'm depressed, I have OCD, I've got an eating disorder. We reify it, and before we know it, that's who we are. So she says this is one of those things that is due to a discordant cause. There's a lot of things about our bodies that do determine how we experience things, but there's a lot that aren't. And she says we're going towards raw conception here. Okay, folks. Boy. Can I go for another 10 minutes? Well, I've got enough to do next week. I'm only on verse 183. Okay. Because there's a lot of, we haven't even gotten to the great one, giving up a fear of emptiness.
Yeah.
Okay, I got enough here to go for another. Okay, there's some good stuff. Okay, but let's finish up this one. Okay, so the first two lines, whatever contains teachings about the world speaks of engagement. Aryadeva is saying that the teachings that talk about the world of samsara are teaching us the evolution of samsara and how we engage or become engaged with all of these difficulties. Using these three wrong conceptions to kind of keep that going. And then the last two lines, whatever contains elucidation of the ultimate speaks of non-engagement, are referring to the teachings on the ultimate nature or on the ultimate truth, and are the teachings to help us disengage from the difficulties that are samsara. So when Joe Blow says, why are we studying all this stuff? Because without studying these teachings, we will never understand emptiness. We've got to get down to like the basics on why we're stuck in this place in the first place. And that is a lot due to misconceptions, which is then why emptiness becomes the ultimate medicine. Okay. If we don't get the connection, we don't get into if we don't get that connection, we get into, I don't want to hear about suffering, I don't want to hear about death, I don't want to hear about refuge, I just want to hear about the ultimate nature and realize it. Nice aspiration. Much better to take our time to understand how cyclic existence arises conventionally, generate some renunciation that wants to be free of it. So this is the verse that the following week Venerable came and went back over for another 45 minutes.
This is 183.
That it's so important to understand conventional truth, the conventional process of causality, not specifically in a biological way, but in the realm of conventional truth. So the whole part about the genetics and the this and that, helpful. But also have to realize how things exist conventionally. As we understand the whole system of causality, that will eliminate all these wrong conceptions. If we have the wrong ideas, we won't create the causes we need to create. And she says, and that's why when you look at the Eightfold Noble Truth, the Eightfold, the right view, right speech, right view, the Noble Eightfold Path. The first one is right view, and the last one is right view. So the wrong misconceptions need to get dismissed in the beginning, and then as you get farther along the path, then the understanding of emptiness, the right view. I mean, they really converge, or you need to almost have a preparation for being able to understand emptiness by understanding how things conventionally exist. First of all, in the beginning, we have to learn what to do and not to do on a conventional level, like keeping good ethical conduct, what Venerable says, stop being a jerk. She says it sounds very basic, but if we do, it'll have a very big positive effect and really ripen our minds and get it prepared to really understanding emptiness. So we've got to understand 4 Noble Truths, 12 links, refuge, karma, impermanence first. Okay, I'll stop there. I know I was racing, but it's really profound teachings on why we're in samsara and how we can really free ourselves. So let's rejoice and dedicate all of this thinking and pondering to our awakening so that we can benefit all sentient beings most perfectly.